Welcome back, wannabes and creators, to another episode of The Business of Art, the podcast that demystifies business for artists. And today on the show, I have my friend Joe Biel, publisher of Microcosm Publishing. They just recently successfully had 1,600 backers on a project called Unfuck Your Brain. And I just couldn't let him get away without getting on the program and figuring out how the fuck they did that. So we're going to get on to it. But before I do, I want to tell you about my book, Sell Your Soul. Sell Your Soul is about how to build a creative career. Maybe unfuck your creative brain so you can actually make some money. And we talk a lot about that in this show. And frankly, this is a book I made for you. It's from all of your questions, all of your comments, and everything you've wanted to know in the past decade as I've grown my business. And you can pick it up at GoSellYourSoul.com. It's just $5 for the ebook and $15 for the paperback. And if you want the audiobook, email me at russell@wannabepress.com and I can hook you up with that too. Additionally, our new graphic novel, Pixie Dust, is on Kickstarter right now. Head on over to Pixie Dust Comic and check it out. It's about a pixie monster hunter that is betrayed, murdered, sells her soul to the queen of the underworld, and comes back as a zombie to seek revenge on the people that killed her. All right, all that bullshit's done. Take it away, Joe. Tell us what you're passionate about these days.
You know, it's like I've been doing this for, it's going to be 22 years in February, and I am still so passionate about book development and making awesome books, and often even, dare I say, teaching an author the work of making an awesome book. And it, really gets me excited and out of bed every single day. Thought I would have lost interest after a few years, but it's like I love doing it every single day.
You know, I love the part where I'm making the book, and I love the part when I get a beautiful book. What I hate is the middle part of that, where you have to meet with the vendor and to get the proofs back, and the proofs are wrong, and that drives me crazy. But if I could just make the book and then get a beautiful book and cut that middle part out, I would be happy as a clam.
Yeah, and I get that. I feel like maybe my situation is a little bit different. It's so I'm coming at this from a position of, the business of art. It's very much how I see my role. I do creative things, and I do a lot of my own art, but I don't really think of Microcosm as being, it's more of a conduit for the business of art, because what I'm adept at the most maybe is doing those vendor relationships and mitigating all the problems that can kind of come between concepts and creation. And, and I guess you've probably seen this too, where the vast majority of people that I know that are creators fall down at those stages. It's all the logistical problems and that where they really just glaze over. And so that's a major reason why I've really put my effort into those areas.
I absolutely agree with you that most people that I talk to, when I talk about supply chain logistics, literally glaze over. I can watch it, their eyes just like a fog come over their eyes. And I'm so this is what a publisher does. This is if you when you're talking about whether you should self-publish or traditionally publish or find a publisher or find someone else to work with, if your eyes are glazing over right now, you probably should work with a traditional publisher or find someone else to publish or find someone to handle these other parts, because most of my day as a self-publisher, a small press publisher, is not writing things or dealing with vendors or dealing with art coming in. Most of it is on a phone to my printer because the book's registers were mismade. And then to get into a meeting where we discuss how we're going to scale into Canada. These are the meeting things that I if your eyes glaze over for that, this is where a publisher can really help you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's you wouldn't believe, or maybe you would believe, how many times I'll sit down with somebody and I'll explain to them that they need to make a book that has where they've done the research to make sure that the book doesn't already exist, and that there's interest without like an overcrowded field. And 9 times out of 10 they come back and they're like, oh, I thought like people would just respond to like high quality work and that's what people would buy. And and you're like, well, yeah, but most people are buying a book to solve a problem, or it's for like some kind of emotional payoff in their life. It's not like there's a shortage of books in the world. It's like quite the opposite. There's so many books that people are kind of really short attention span. And so, a lot of that has to fall on the author, is to, make sure they're creating something where there is want, or, I guess they don't have to, but it's like they're going to suffer the consequences of that if they don't, and you wouldn't believe like how many times people want me to make that problem magically go away, as if that's like something within my power.
Like when you just look at 1 million books published a year, like, I agree with you where you look at somebody and you can tell that like this is a thing that they're incredibly passionate about, and like they just don't want to let go, that like there's either no market there or like there's an oversaturated market there. And you have this conversation like, yes, I understand that you love this thing, and like you can keep doing it. This is what I tell people, like, you can keep doing it. Like, go do it. Go make your thing, but just know that the potential for it to sell well is very small. It is never infinitesimal, because there's always that one breakout. But if you're playing the high risk or the low risk, high percentage plays, this is not one you should do now. Maybe 5 years, but not this minute.
And I can see that. It's like, I think a lot of times when we have that talk, people come back and they're a little bit like, well, like maybe we could just try and maybe people would like it. And, like maybe we'll all be surprised. I just have to come back and be like, you don't understand. Like, people are never going to find your book because stores aren't going to stock your book because it's unclear what it is, what value it has, and who it's for, And we can kind of go around and around and around like that. And sometimes, you'll find out that like somebody misrepresented the nature of their work, or something like that, because they thought it would get them in the door, and then it really just becomes a waste of everybody's time. So I feel like it's really vital for the creator to understand like who their audience is and why they're making a book, and like to do the research to see what else is out there and like what people might buy in addition to or instead of their book.
Yeah, so this is something that I always come up to for people that like when people are self-publishing, have a lot easier time convincing them that they need my show or they should listen to my show than people who traditionally publish, because the traditional publish answer, though, especially younger artists who are trying to traditionally publish, they go, yeah, but the publisher handles that. And I'm like,
no.
You just have no idea. Yeah, I try and say, you have, yes, the publisher can help you and amplify what you're doing, but like you have to know like how to write to market yourself. Like you have to be the writer who can go to a publisher and say, here's the market research that I've done, and here's why you should spend any time working with me.
Yeah, and that's another one where, right, we have that one over and over and over, and you're like, and I tell every author that like it works best if you think of it as a creative partnership. You really have to think of it that way, because or it's like almost worse if they think of it as a power struggle, because then it's like everybody loses, Whereas, they have to learn how to do some of this stuff. We've been doing this for over 20 years, and we know what we're doing, and that's been, sometimes that can be the most validating and the most frustrating conversation sometimes at the same time.
Absolutely. You, I always am baffled when people talk to me about the adversarial relationship that they plan to have with a publisher before they even pick up the book. And like they're going into this agreement like the publisher's going to be the worst. I'm like, why would you work with a publisher who was the worst? And they're like, that's just how it is. And you're like, but what?
Right, yeah. And I think it's just people don't know, or they've maybe read or heard some things. And so there's a certain perception about publishers. And I think, a lot of the problem is that, like, and I get it, there's a total feeling of rejection dynamic where everybody knows what it feels like to have been rejected. And because there's just absolute overproduction of people writing books right now, that it's not even 1% of them are going to be accepted by a publisher. So there's the perception that publishers are difficult and not really on your team, and maybe don't necessarily know what they're doing. And I absolutely get all those feelings, and sometimes that kind of results in an even funnier dynamic where the author is seemingly surprised that, like, when we are competent, and because it's like our real job is to put things in a way that communicates to their audience that the book is for them, and that's like really what a publisher does. Like we were talking about a little bit on the Facebook group, it's the job of a publisher is book development, and I feel like everything else is irrelevant. That's like really what you would bring in a publisher for, to figure out how to communicate those vital elements of, know where to look and who to talk to, and to have experienced people to sort of, make those aspects of the book coherent, and that's, because that's a lot of the times where even like a self-published book with a professionally designed cover kind of falls flat, is it doesn't know like the proper metadata, application, or like trim sizes or production values to kind of meet the other books on the shelf, and that's ultimately the thing that would like keep it out of a store. I help people that are self-publishers, mostly because I know how hard it is to do this. And again, maybe you would believe how often people really just want to argue about it, rather than like getting professional help. They really want to try and, say things like, but don't you think that, books about zombies and pie are just so in right now that like you could do it any way you want and people would love one that's like a true aberration? And I'm like, no, that's really not how that works. It's like you really want to make it clear what it is and who it's for, always.
I like to think that a publisher tries to make your best book. Like they're not trying to make they're trying to make your book the best it can be to sell the most to the most people inside of your audience. And I like to say when I'm talking to people, well, you can do it your way. It doesn't matter. Like you can do it your way, but you came to me. It's not the other way around. Like I'm not begging to publish this thing for you. Like I'm trying to work with you to make it take your words and make it as good as humanly possible, so that it's still you, just the best version of you.
That's a really good way to put it, because it's often seen as the other way around, that like, we're going to water it down, or, trying to mess with it fundamentally or something. A good publisher just makes the work the best book it can be, which is brilliant and, simply a way to put it.
I mean, and I would hope, like, if you have the skills and the chops to make your book exactly what you want it, then that is also fine. Like I have nothing against like I have no dog in the fight against good publishers and self-publishing. Now, the issue that I come with what we've been talking about so far, and the reason why I think so many people are adversarial, is because 70, 80, 90% of publishers, they suck. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to do a release day, and they don't know how to do any of the things that you're talking about. And so most people have a bad relationship with a bad publisher, and they think every publisher is like that. It may not be 90%, but there are a lot of publishers who won't do anything for your book. They won't even put your book out, or they'll put it out on the wrong schedule. I've had this happen to me a few times where I go, well, I mean, I can do that. Like, I cannot release my books when I say I'm going to release them. Like, that's easy. Like, like saying you're going to release a book in March and not releasing it till May. Like, I can blow deadlines. So, how do you think that somebody could sort of tell before they even get to the point of being disappointed? Like what kinds of things should they look for in a good publisher?
Well, that's a really good question. I think, fundamentally, if you're looking for a good publisher, you don't want to be a drain on their time, but at the same time, you want to be good at sort of discerning their chops, essentially doing book development, and if they have distribution. Because I've had, a number of friends who, sell a book and then find out they've basically sold a book to a vanity publisher, somebody that has really no way to take the book to market. So those are kind of the two things that you're looking for. So, essentially, if somebody has expressed interest, and you really shouldn't be doing this if they haven't expressed interest, you'd go to them and you'd say, like, what ideas do you have about this? Why do you think that makes sense? Like, what other books have you done that are similar to my book? Why are you interested in my book? You would ask all those kind of feeling it out questions, and then sort of see how they take that, because they're not going to be put off by you sort of getting a sense of where they're coming from. Maybe their motives do rub you wrong, and maybe that's not a good fit for that reason. But, by and large, I think that's when you can learn more even about your own audience. That's where you can learn more about, like, how books are distributed. You can learn more about the industry, which is horrendously complicated. And, I once had to explain it to an accountant who really was so flabbergasted that she just kept insisting that she didn't understand, because it couldn't possibly be the way that it is, and so, but a good publisher deals with all that for you, which I feel like is like the secondary value, of getting paid and getting money out of, getting blood from a stone in many cases. And, and so part of that is, figuring out, do they have actual bookstore distribution? And if they don't, like, how do they principally sell their books? And, knowing when that doesn't matter. Like, if you're a business author and mostly you would be speaking at conventions, then you wouldn't really need bookstore distribution, because so much of that world is built on direct sales and, and convention sales and, speakers' fees. But it's like, if you're writing a novel, then you really need to be in bookstores, if that's your goal. If it's like a fun project that you're doing that isn't really your main gig, then, like, maybe you don't care as much. But, that's really, people buy novels in bookstores. If you're written a book on gardening, for example, then, you would have a lot of what we call special sales and gift sales, and, and you would be sold in, like, totally different kinds of places. And, that's kind of where you would find your audience, or where if you have an existing audience, like, where they would look for your book. And you kind of want to make that at every level as easy as you can. So, kind of feeling out those kind of questions with your publisher is ultimately the way to determine, like, one, if they know what they're doing. Two, if, like, you have some kind of chemistry as human beings, that's, like, pretty important too. A lot of times I'll talk to an author that sold their book to a company, and maybe it was their first book, and they have a contract that, doesn't even allow them to see their book cover until the book comes out. And, they find a lot of the choices really, maybe not alienating, but, like, definitely strange and not how they would have done it themselves. And then they find out that those were actually really good choices, and the book did really well because of those choices. And, and then ultimately coming around to see, like, that's the value that the publisher brings to it, is they have that familiarity. Like, it's not actually often helpful for the author to be involved at every level in every decision, as much as some authors would prefer it that way.
There's so many things that I love about the things that you said, because people always ask me. The biggest one is that people always ask me, like, how to find a publisher. And my answer is always like, well, go to where you would go to buy your book, and, like, open all of the books and find out who the publisher is in those books. And then contact that, see what their submission policy is, and talk to the editor and see if, like, they like the thing that you're doing. I think people overcomplicate, like, how to, like, they're just trying to figure out how to spam as many publishers as possible. And I have had so many friends, and a lot of them are with, like, legitimate publishers. Like, they may have sold their book to a legitimate publisher, but that publisher is not in the genre that they are in. So, like, maybe it's a kid's book and they do, like, reprints of, like, old novels. And you're like, sure, like, technically this press is a real press. Like, they are not a bad publisher, but you are such an outlier to their audience that there's almost no chance that, like, you will succeed with this publisher, because they have no idea how to sell to this particular audience.
Yeah, that is a really well stated also. I feel like the other endless advice I give is that if you treat all publishers as interchangeable, or if you treat your publisher as like an ATM, then you will fail. Not all publishers are made the same. And I think the thing people fundamentally misunderstand the most is that your publisher isn't just like a warehouse with a distribution arm. Your publisher has a certain reputation in a certain subset and like certain genres. When they get too far outside of those genres, all that kind of disappears. That you can't really, like, we did a book last year with Dr. Jane Goodall, of all people, like a world famous best-selling author. And it's kind of a children's book, but it's a picture book about a young man who adopts the giant bird that the Roadrunner cartoon was based on. But it's like a real-life version of one living in the city, and it's pretty outside of what we would do typically. It's like a nature book. And it's an amazing book, but it's like nothing like anything we've ever done before. And the most helpful advice we got, and we got it over and over and over from the buyers when we ran our Kickstarter project, everything, people said, this doesn't really seem like a book that Microcosm would do. And we were like, no, this is a really great book. It's an awesome book. Like, you really should check it out. And then like, yeah, I get that, but you ain't hearing me. This is not the kind of book you do. And, and so then we had kind of the predictable problem of like, we have an awesome book, but it's like we don't have relationships on the nature shelf. We don't have relationships with like the public parks that, whose gift shops sell books like that, And oftentimes it's an insurmountable climb to build all of those relationships for the sake of one book, and that's, I think, the hardest thing for people to understand is that, like, when you start like a self-publishing company, it really is much better to have as tight of a niche as you possibly can, because then everything that you publish will be within that niche, and you can sell the next book to the person that bought the previous book. And you won't need to have this constant game of like, we're reinventing ourselves every single month, and that's, we have one of our authors primarily writes fiction. And, we just had that talk yesterday where I was like, this is not, like, you really need to pick one genre of fiction, And he was just like, well, I have different inspirations and different, like, pursuits all the time. And I'm like, yeah, but then you run into the problem of, like, maybe, like, somebody likes the last book that you read, that you wrote, and maybe it's their favorite book. Maybe they love the last book that you wrote, and then the book you publish is a Western, and they just don't like Westerns, And that's, and so it's like you're sort of incapacitating your ability, because so much of the work of being an author or a publisher is somebody discovers you, falls in love, and then they go to your catalog and they're like, oh, I bought the one outlier.
I mean, I have this same thing that happened to me. Like, I was cocky like that, and I, after we did Ichabod and Katrina, I was like, well, I have these, like, I have a mystery novel and a kid's book and a science fiction novel, and fuck it, I'm just going to do those. I'm going to put them out there, and, like, whatever, people bought Katrina, some of them will buy My Father Didn't Kill Himself, and, like, sure, a third of them bought My Father Didn't Kill Himself, which was my mystery novel. A third of those people bought the kid's book. A third of those people, or half those people, bought the sci-fi book. And I was like, what the fuck is going on here? And they're like, look, man, like, make monster things. Like, make things with monsters, comics, fantasy novels. Like, we'll be at the fucking monster thing. Like, we're there for monsters. And so then, after making like $7,000 total in 2016, we launched the Monster Anthology in 2017. Big, beautiful hardcover book. Boom. Like $27,000. Then we launched the sequel to Katrina. Boom. Like $13,000 already. And you're like, I kind of knew that was going to happen, but like I wanted the books out there because they were there. And now I have people that go to my back catalog and go, I really love this book, Spaceship Broken. And I'm like, you'll love it for fucking ever. Because, like, you'll love that until, like, 10 years when I can somehow figure out a way to, like, make another one of those. And they're like, oh, cool. Thanks for not... So it's not just, like... Yeah. It's, like, a bummer. Like, it's like, oh, well, so what? I'm not good enough to, like, make a book for? Thanks a lot, jerk.
Right, yeah. And I get it, it's like we definitely get that the same response basically to the book that we did, which was called Amika's World. The story is local, and and we get just the best fan mail for it, where they're like, "This is the most precious thing I own. This is my favorite book. When is the sequel coming out?" And we're like, "Sorry, man, no sequel. Maybe we have something else you're interested in. Maybe we don't." And I think that's hard for people to understand. Is that like, I was on a panel at Portland State University last year, and I was the only one. And it's funny because like as a publisher, I am quote unquote in the field of mass production. And everybody else was like artisanal makers where they make one thing at a time and that's sort of their brand. And and it's like that would never make sense in publishing. The number of hours that goes into it. If you were selling one-offs, it'd have to be like $25,000 just because of the amount of hours that goes into the creation of it, And so it's more like we're high-stakes gamblers with like some informed decision making, that we know what people are interested in. And if there's anything true about publishing is that it's consistent, and that change is very slow. And so I think, that really goes against like the stigma of, Amazon's marketing campaigns that, publishers are greedy fucks and, don't know what they're doing and are an outdated convention. And, and none of that is really true. It's like there's exceptions, obviously, like, but you could name them on both hands. And in those exceptions, it's like still those people would have been better off statistically playing the lottery than they would be publishing via Amazon and finding mainstream success, because it's that unlikely, and I think that's really hard because it kind of latches on to people's hopes and dreams. In reality, almost every author would be better off like working with somebody that knows what they're doing, and and maybe the author is doing, but as you say, most of them, it's like left brain skills plus right brain skills. Like it happens, but it doesn't happen all that often.
Well, and on top of that, like, so I'm an author and a creator and I run a publishing company, and the amount of time that I could spend theoretically like writing more shit if I didn't have to deal with supply chain logistics and like carry over interest and like fucking like trying to figure out how to like maneuver my inventory so like I can write it off next year without having to like there's so much like business stuff that even if you are like good at it, which I am, it doesn't mean that like you should necessarily be doing it. For instance, like I'm very good at making big, beautiful books and selling them at conventions and on Kickstarter. I have no experience with actual distribution, like consortium, foreign rights deals, all this stuff that I'm butting up against now that I'm like, I don't even know like where to start. Like if you want a big, beautiful book that like you could sell on Kickstarter and at conventions, like I'm the guy to do that. But if you want to actually like have a relationship with a distributor and get into bookstores, like I have no fucking idea what I'm doing. And at some point you hit this moment of like in self-publishing, and I'm hitting it now, which is why I'm talking about it, where it's like, shit, I either have to scale and become like a big boy publisher and like take on books and like go to book expos and like all this stuff and like think like a real publisher, or I have to find a publisher and then like really think like a creative, but I can't scale both up simultaneously. And I think you can do that for a while. Like you can do that for a few years. But as you grow, there's this cap that like you kind of need somebody, at least in some aspect, to take you to the next level, unless you are willing to take you to the next level, which is an insane amount of work. It's not that much work to like make one book or two books or three books. But when you actually want the distribution that comes along with being more successful to like get into bookstores and such, you have to like that is a learned skill that publishers have had for like have been cultivating for over 100 years.
That's a good way to put it. And and my story is kind of similar to yours. Like I started out as a writer. I mean, in the loosest sense, a writer and an artist, and I in this, in the 90s, and I had more like idealistic didactic dreams, and then it was more that I found that there were a lot of people making really good stuff that just wasn't, they didn't know how to interact with like the giant apparatus of publishing. And so I was like, well, I can learn shit, and so gradually like, my own work got kind of put by the wayside and then completely forgotten. And then I'll do something by myself like maybe every 4 years or so, and then there'll be like a year where I'll do like 3 books, and then 5 years where I do nothing, and things like that. But it was, it's really shifted away from being about my own work, because similarly, I'm all day long, like I'm on the phone putting out fires. It's like I'm having to deal with like we sold 55 copies of this book, but every copy we have is in the Ingram warehouse in Tennessee, and how can we get enough to complete this order, and they need it on Friday, and things like that happen all the time.
Right. And like when you're doing your creative thing, like you're taking resources away from the people that depend on you, which are the creators and writers, and then you start feeling guilty doing your own personal work, because like if you do your own personal work, you're not like these people that have their trust in you are like being cast aside, and like then you feel guilty, or at least that's how it feels with me. I don't know if that's how it is with you, but like I was brought up on Catholic guilt, so like I have that in spades even when I'm doing the thing I should be doing.
Right. And I guess it's similar. It's like I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up Catholic, so I know all about guilt. I know all about that. But I kind of, it's like I've also middle-aged. I've been doing this a while now. It's like I kind of had to learn to get past that. And so I kind of settled on a balance where I'm like, okay, like during the week, like this is my 9-to-5 job, and then I do my own pursuits on the weekend, like as if, like any other like working person would do. It's like my creative work isn't the breadwinning component here, it's like, but to some degree, like the result of that is that like our best-selling books, none of them are my books, which is, it's better. It like makes a more credible house, and it, it looks better. Obviously part of me is like, oh, if I had only like shifted my priorities, but then I'm like, well, these people are like more talented than I am. And, and then the other major problem is that it's hard to have sufficient emotional distance from your own work to do development on it. So it's obviously like with everything in life, it's a balance, really the ultimate goal is like, like we don't have any financial backing. So we're independent in the sense that like we have to, the money coming in every day has to match the money going out. That's a pretty tall order in the modern publishing world.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I have the opposite side where like all of the books we've put out are like my books, and like they are the most successful books. So like, and we put out a lot less books. So, but I want to talk about something else for a moment, which is Kickstarter, because we're both running Kickstarters right now. Your 760,000th Kickstarter. For How Not to Kill Yourself, me for Pixie Dust. And I have a very a pointed question about a previous campaign, because when you look at your previous campaigns, they all kind of fall within a range of backers. It's like 100 and 500 backers, it seems like.
Yep.
But then you had this very last campaign, the Unfuck Your Brain campaign, which had a massive 1,617 backers. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you think happened in that campaign, where you got more than triple your like high-end backer count.
That's some very astute observations that, and I had never really okay. So again, we're gonna take this back to like before the invention of Kickstarter. So we started in 1996, and I was like really had strong feelings and like a very specific vision. And I'm getting a little older. I find out that I'm autistic. I have a lot of problems. But like all these things, like our message and our publishing line like does not change one iota throughout, the entire passage of this time. And so, the weirdest thing in 2007, where, all of our previous books had sold between like 4,000 and about 25,000 copies, you know, or no, I guess we had gone a little bit above that, like maybe like 4,000 and like 30,000 copies, you know, in that neighborhood. But we just couldn't get past that like 30,000 barrier. And then in 2007, we did this book called Make Your Place that it was, you know, it just happened to come out like perfectly in the recession. And it was something that like kind of got outside of our intellectual ghetto, you know, where we had made so many books. You know, at that time we had made, you know, maybe only 50 books or something, maybe, you know, maybe approaching 100. Actually, yeah, we had just broken 100. And then in this book, you know, it's, you know, we're selling like 300 a day, you know, and we can't really figure out why, you know. And it was sort of similar, you know, to Unfuck Your Brain, where we're just like, ultimately what it comes down to is the book communicated very clearly, in both cases, you know, the book communicated very clearly who it was, you know, who it was for, what other books it would sit besides, you know, and it did that really well aesthetically, and it did that really well in terms of like kind of taking you back to an emotional place where you were like, oh yeah, you know. And in the case of Make Your Place, it really like went back to like, you know, 1970s Whole Earth kind of catalog. And I didn't grow up with that, so I didn't even know about that until people started bringing it up, that they thought that was what the influence was. And then I went back and like researched it, and I bought all the old books and catalogs and stuff, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool, but like, you know, I've like kind of passed that point in my life. But so what it was that, you know, it was just like really spot on development, like really good keywords, really good like, you know, comp development, which is what it's called. It's people, you know, differed if that's competitive or comparable, you know, whether, and what that ultimately means is it looks and reads like the other books that people know and love and have sold well, you know. And so Make Your Place, it's going over 120,000 copies now, and we're going to do like a 10th anniversary edition, and you know, it's a really neat, you know, kind of thing. And it really helped because it was, you know, intergenerational. It's like the first book we had done that's like you and like your mom and your grandma like all could appreciate the same book, you know. And we had never really thought about that or done that before or anything. And that, you know, that also like gave us enough of a nest egg that like, you know, we knew that we were going to get to keep on doing this for forever, you know. I mean, in some senses we like invested the money wisely in other books and that kind of thing. And so, you know, fast forward another, I guess, 10 years. And then when Dr. Faith Harper got in touch, you know, she came by our office on her honeymoon of like, I have a vision for this book. I want to do this book. I have all your books in my waiting room and in my office. I love your books. So you were my first choice. And we were like, holy shit. Like, this is it's because it's like, in the world of self-help and psychology, the biggest problem is credibility, you know. And so to like have somebody that had 20 years of experience as a doctor of psychology, we were like, this is huge, you know. We constantly struggle because we get people that are really good writers and like cool artists, but they ain't got no credibility in the world because people want the like, you know, they want all the letters after their name, you know, because they think that's where like, you know, learned experience comes from, or professional acumen or whatever. Where, you know, and it's like, I believe it's kind of a mix of the two. But, you know, so we kind of knew because, you know, we had gotten enough feedback from like we've worked with every distributor in the business over the years. I shit you not, you know. And so they, you know, they constantly give you that kind of feedback. They're like, this book would be really cool, you know, if it was written by a doctor of psychology, you know. And we were like, well, they're not, so let's move on, you know. And so we knew that was a big deal, you know. And then one of our salespeople and I were meeting last week, and you know, and he's like, the difference between your book and every other publisher that I've worked with is that you're just a little more direct, you know. And I think it helps because it's like an era of short attention span, you know. And so that was the other big thing. I can't remember what the original working title was for Unfuck Your Brain, but we had a little bit of an inter-office argument about whose idea it was. If it was, I knew it was one of two different employees, but I couldn't remember whose. But one of them had come up with the cover concept, and the other one had come up with the title. And you know, it was just like completely perfect because it's like, you know. And then we also just fell into like the dumb luck territory of, people are just really ready to kind of untangle their brain, like they're really ready for that kind of book. They're really ready to like get rid of the stigma, thinking that that's for people that have more serious problems than they do, or, or whatever. And so, it's like it really, and this is, maybe the most frustrating thing about the Unfuck Your Brain campaign was, like we had run at that point, as you said, 7,000 Kickstarter campaigns. So like we really knew what we were doing, and we had, relationships at Kickstarter, and we knew all the different things that work, and we know what they value, and we knew like what gets success. But really it came down to the fact that nothing that we did had any tangible benefit on that campaign, or social networks, brought in about 1% of that money, literally. And everybody else was finding it through like Kickstarter's discovery tool, or the fact that like because they were being, backers were coming in so frequently that it was like constantly, being put on these lists and, popular publishing projects, things like that. And I don't even think like Kickstarter put it in their newsletter or anything. I think it was just the mechanism of how their apparatus works, and like the way they built their infrastructure, and so that was, and so again, it's not dumb luck, which I think is like what an unobservant or an unenlightened observer would see. I really think it comes down to like the book development spoke to people, the way the language was, and that's really been reinforced over and over and over when we talk to the backers, when we ask them why, or even just based on the questions that they have, where they'll say things like, please don't send me anything by somebody that doesn't have doctor next to their name. And I was like, okay, I get it. Like, that's what you value this book over all the ones you can buy at Barnes & Noble because, like, this is a more direct book, It's like, it's not pulling any punches, and you kind of get a taste of how it's going to read from the development, And so, and again, it's like somewhat affirming because I've been doing this long enough that I can't always predict when something will be successful, in this level. Like I can kind of predict like, okay, we will sell at least 3,000 to 5,000 copies of this book. But when we have a total outlier like this, like I can't always like pick them out of the catalog, and so that's, it's comforting and not in certain ways. So again, it's like comforting in the sense that like development is king, and that is really what makes a king, rather than, just like, because you can have a great book and it will either sell or not sell based on the development, and how like things like trim size and price point and like production values and, how like, what kind of keyword you use. And, those are the things that ultimately makes a book successful or not. And as well on Kickstarter, which is comforting. There's like no, you can make the same book work on Kickstarter that can work really well in the bookstores. And then that's the other thing is that we had to do the second printing basically because, well, as you might imagine, that Kickstarter was much more successful than we anticipated. So we had to run another 7,000 books right away because we were like, okay, and now we're getting, we sold 2,000 in Europe that we don't have books to send them, and so we had to have, nice conversations with the printer where you're like, we need you to do this in 2 weeks or we're going to have to take our business to a different printer. And they, of course, said, absolutely, we'll do it in 2 weeks, and so it's like things like that where, it's really the same development transfers across, all audiences. It's not like one thing works on Kickstarter and one thing works on Amazon and one thing works on, in the retailers. Yeah. It's like,
yeah, you know what? The more I talk to people and all who are experts in like Etsy and Amazon and like publishers and Kickstarter, or when people ask me about Kickstarter, I'm like, we need to. My first thing I say is always like, we need to dispel the notion that Kickstarter is magic. It is a function that you can launch something on Kickstarter if you should launch it on Kickstarter, but like these principles, these like. Say there's 20 principles, like will work launching anything, anywhere. Just certain things will respond better on Kickstarter, and certain things will respond better on Amazon, and certain things will respond better on Etsy, and certain things will respond better if you just set up your own landing page and your own membership site and like just drive traffic there. It just like, it depends on the product, which is why every time I sit with somebody and they go, I want to launch this I don't know, like course on Kickstarter. I'm like, that doesn't sound good at all. Like, why would you do that? Like, people don't go to Kickstarter to like find a course. Like, they go other places. So like, you're giving Kickstarter their 5%, and you're almost destined to fail because anybody who finds your thing is going to say, the F is like this. Why the fuck? I'm going to say fuck. I don't know why I didn't say fuck before, but why the fuck? Like, is this even here? And the people that you're driving there are going to be like, what the fuck is a Kickstarter? I don't even know what this is. So, like, it's not only neutral, it's at best neutral, and it's probably hurting your chances. But it's nice to hear you also say, like, this is kind of the way that you do it has different functions on Kickstarter or like on Amazon or at retailers, but like the base underlying concepts are the same.
Yeah. I agree with everything that you said.
Cool. I have one more question for you, and then I want to talk about your current Kickstarter. Does the success of Unfuck Your Brain change anything that you're doing moving forward in the development or any other process that you are working for, or is it just kind of an outlier in this process that you've developed in system over the year?
Right. And so, the one publishing is that it's incredibly arduously slow. So when you are, we are what you would consider a medium-sized publisher, and from all that I can be told, that basically means that like we have two market forces, but what it means is like we can't be bought in through like small press departments anymore, which has ultimately been kind of difficult for us. But so the really demanding thing about being a medium-sized publisher is that you have to announce what you're publishing a year in advance, and that's not just like, on one hand, it's like a dumb rule that is imposed upon us by the industry that hasn't really changed much. But on the other hand, it's like, it does make sense, because it's reviewers want to review the book before it's been published. They want to have time to review the book, they want to sort of see it before everyone else sees it so they can be the one to like let it out of the bag. And then, the salespeople need time to like really understand what the book, like what each book is, and what benefits it serves and who it's for and why somebody might buy it and like what they would sell it alongside and, things like that. And so, we have all those things, and you can do what's called the drop-in title, which is basically where you're like, okay, you don't get to have the time to figure this stuff out. You just have to deal with this. And basically that means that title is going to not do as well as it would have if you had done it right. Places, the major wholesalers will buy, 6 months before publication, and, the chain stores are kind of the same way. And, the gift stores will like look at and flag titles that they're interested in before publication. And, so ultimately you're eradicating, people's ability to do their job by changing things up too quickly. But, so that's half of it. So it's like, yes, this like the success of Unfuck Your Brain will totally change how we do things in the future, but it can't change them in a major way, or in a rapid way, So, on one hand, this is the reason we did the Kickstarter for How Not to Kill, which has a foreword by the author of Unfuck Your Brain, because it's a really great story about how, and she's the one that brought that book to us, the Dr. Faith Harper, because she had essentially bought a copy on Amazon and then bootlegged a copy to have like on display in her office for her patients to find it and read it. And she said within a week, one of her patients stole it because they needed it. So she came to us and said, like, this book is so important that like somebody took my only copy, so like you should just publish it. And so we contacted the author, who was like really had obviously been contacted a lot by scammers, with pay-to-play publishing operations, and who was like really tentative and wanted to go really slowly, and but eventually did come around to understand that we were a real operation and like would pay him money rather than the other way around. And so, and then we did end up signing the book, and it comes out in the spring, and so that all kind of worked out. So we wouldn't have run that campaign, but the book was already slated for release. So the thing that we did do is Dr. Faith Harper is very prolific, human being, like probably the hardest working person that I know, though she argues back and forth with me that I am the hardest working person that she knows. So, that's a good little feud for us to have. But so we kind of, she had, I think, 24 books or something under contract with us already. So we just like bumped up the timeline for the next one. So it wasn't quite too late for us to add books for her to do two on for that, and then for next winter, she's going to write her book on depression. And then, she has a book about adulting, and she has a book about managing anger, and they're all little like capsule, like, similar to Unfuck Your Brain kind of books. And those are really easy for us to do because, she takes direction well, and when we're like, okay, we research the market, and, so she's also a licensed sexologist, which I guess is actually a thing and not just like something that sounds really funny. But so she's like literally a doctor of people having sex as well. And so a lot of that, and so she had written books about that and about relationships, very, very different in the world of books, in the world of publishing. And so, we had to like kind of separate that out for her. We're like, okay, this is really two different books. And, you do books about relationships at one time of year, and then you do books about sex at a different time of year. And, bookstores don't really put out books about sex because they get stolen, and they don't really have nearly as big of a section as they do for relationships and things like that. So it majorly informed our approach and like revamped, like what the amount of demands, and we really saw this like kind of happening slowly after the election, that like people were having obviously a lot of anxiety and, a lot of needs for these specific kind of mental health support products. And, and so then that's like kind of where we put our ass, where we were like, okay, this is what people need from us right now. So that's what we're going to do, And so a lot of it, so it's like we would look for, and listeners, maybe you're doing a book like this, we would look for more things in those veins, especially stuff like graphic novels about things like this. And we've gotten a few, but they just, we had one woman where she had done a graphic novel about bipolar disorder, but she had drawn it at like 12 by 18 inches, and she wasn't willing to reduce the size of the book. And we're like, you can't really, we can't like commercially publish a book like that because nobody will stock it, And she wasn't willing to reduce the page, but it was a really awesome book. And, it's like a kind of book where I'm like, oh, well, those are the kind of things where I'm like, this needs to be like a decision born where logic meets emotion, not, at odds with each other, but we would definitely want more books like that, and, like the book Marbles would be a good example of, if it's a graphic novel about, sort of like living in your head with struggles like that. And it was really, like a breakout book, a graphic novel that sort of got out of that sort of intellectual ghetto. But, and so this kind of thing, made magazines, which you really shouldn't because they're not really helpful and they're dreadfully boring. You can, you could chase trends all day long, but by the time like a trend is known, it's sort of too late for it. You really need to look at like what your niche is and like what you can do really well, how you can better like, build a list around that niche without it being like too redundant.
Awesome. Okay, so just final things is why I'm going to give you 30 seconds to a minute to tell people why they should go and check out How Not to Kill Yourself on Kickstarter. Or Unfuck Your Brain if you like have a pre-order site, whatever. Like, where do you want them to go and check out your stuff, and what do you want them to check out?
The Kickstarter is always prescient, it's always timely. Let's go with that. Should I go ahead?
Yeah, go for
30
it.
30 seconds. Cool.
However long you want.
So
I don't care how long it is.
Man, clock is no longer ticking. So where you can also pick up a copy of Unfuck Your Brain if you so choose, or you can go to our website, microcosmpublishing.com. And, the thing with How Not to Kill Yourself is it's really a book unlike other books. It's like a guy that has lived with like crippling depression for seemingly his entire life. And he's, basically the first person to tell you that like being creative and sort of like writing your fantasy world around your own life is the way out. It's like the way to deal with your problems, and and to sort of like find hope in that despair. And he's it's funny. He's like self-effacing. He knows what it's like. And the merit of the book, and it's been years since I've been in that kind of mental space, like probably more than 10 years. And it's like I can still read the book and chuckle and be like, yep, totally spot on. That's that's the lived experience. And and it's really just, I guess, unlike other books about suicide, and because he's basically saying like, yep, that's how it is. Ain't nothing you can do to change it, but like, here's what you do to live with it. Here's what you do to get by every day. Here's what you do to like make the best of it all. And a lot of that is like having a fantasy world and like eating a lot of cake and like watching movies and playing video games and like doing stuff that like gives you meaning and purpose. And he would never use words like that, but that's my Americanization of it, because he's a British guy from York. And so a lot of it, it's like a funny book. You could read it quickly. It goes fast. It's like his illustrations are hilariously weird. And he's like he makes himself drawn as a blob. Because I think that's like how he feels. And so it's a super fun book. And then if you're the kind of person that needs a doctor endorsement, we put that as the forward.
Yeah, I checked this out before we got on the call, and like, as someone who has battled depression and suicidal thoughts like my whole life, like I was immediately drawn to it. You have gotten 3 more backers since we've been on this call, so like that's always good. So and that's and the
other thing,
go for it,
about it is like it's super, like I couldn't tell you. So we published a zine of like a condensed version of the original, and I couldn't even tell how many stores were like, I can't sell something called How Not to Kill Yourself. Nobody is going to walk in and walk out with a book with that. Every one of those stores came back and were like, we sold out, and which is the thing where it's just like culture is changing, that people are totally coming around on that. And it's like at events too, where whenever we have it, people totally will walk up and buy it and they have no shame, whereas even our books about sex, it's like people are squirmy about buying in person, and so I think that's like, it's a thing where I think more and more and more people are coming out and being like, yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, I remember when I originally wrote my book, My Father Didn't Kill Himself, and they're like, you can't talk about suicide in a book. And I was like, but like 13 Reasons, now I'm like 13 Reasons Why is like one of the biggest shows of like this past year. So like there's this, in my opinion, clear, I would assume your opinion too, like having it out in the open is like helps break this stigma and allows people to talk about it in an open way that allows them to seek help when maybe there would have been no way to seek help previously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the whole thing, is like you destigmatize anything by being like, yeah, I live with that. And so I just kind of, myself, my personal life, I just kind of let it all hang out, because then it's like, then people, that one, it gets you the best fan mail, because then people are like, oh yeah, I go through that too, that sucks. And then, it like makes it normal, So that's a personal politic, but it goes good with the publishing too.
Yeah, I could keep talking about this forever, but I just have 2 more things. Promise. 2 more questions.
Okay, cool.
The first one is this is the time when all of the people stop tuning out as they're like drawing or writing or doing what they're doing, and they listen to you impart the one piece of advice that you want them to leave this conversation with. It could be something you talked about already. It could be something that you haven't talked about yet, but what do you want them to leave this conversation thinking about or doing?
Okay, so if you're a creative person or an artist or a publisher or an author, or have any aspirations of having a physical book existing in the world, then when, maybe this weekend, go to your local bookstore, at least one, ideally 2, and spend a good minute like imagining your book there. Maybe it's like one of the face-out ones on display. And then spend some time looking at the other books, noticing like what's consistent about them all, and looking at, like kind of words they use, like how, if they all have like a photo on the cover, then yours should have a photo on the cover. If they're all like an illustration of a dragon fighting like a knight, then yours should look like that too. And, like looking at what size they are, like how much they cost, maybe like looking who the publishers are, and seeing like if maybe one publisher kind of controls that whole shelf, or maybe one author kind of controls that whole shelf. You can then look it up backwards on Amazon, and then look up that subject and look up, who has the books in, the top 15,000 or so, and see if it's all one author, or see if, there's some room there maybe for you. And I wrote an article about it that's on microcosm about like how to do title development investigation, and it'll explain like the formula for looking up what sales metrics are manageable. What it comes down to is, like then investigate those publishers' websites and, like how they do things, and like presumably you also read books in your area of interest as well as writing books, and if you don't, you really should, and like supporting other creators. Ultimately, like that is what will make you like a better performing business of art kind of person. And and ultimately not being argumentative about those things will deliver you to success, and being positive and supporting other people and like actually supporting other people's work and like feeling happy in your heart when other people are successful will take you so much further than being jealous of other people's success. And I know that is the hardest thing, but that is the most important thing.
Awesome. I couldn't agree more. All right. Where can we find you guys online? Social media, website, whatever you want to plug, and then we'll say goodbye.
Cool. So microcosmpublishing.com is kind of the landing pad for everything. And, we're on the tweets and the Facebook and we're on the Instagram. Our Instagram is probably the funniest one if you like funny, because we do all kinds of topical stuff that isn't like directly product related, but more just like, like the funny shit we find during the course of the day. And then, like I'm totally down if you have a quick question that you just want to be like, here's my quandary, can you help? It's like I've been doing this for over 20 years and making a lot of mistakes, so I'm totally happy to give back in the way of being like Y/N or do it this other way or look up this thing. And my email is just joe@microcosmpublishing.com. And I totally write back. Sometimes it can take me a week or whatever, but I totally love to help other people with their problems.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. This was fun.
All right. Hope you enjoyed that one with Joe. If you did, go find him online and tell him how much you enjoyed it. And while you're there, go subscribe to our podcast on Apple, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or anywhere else. Maybe Podbean. That'd be cool too. Also, go check out my Sell Your Soul nonfiction book, all about how to build your creative career. Look, there are hundreds of hours of this podcast. There's just not enough for any human to legitimately get through them all in any reasonable length of time. But you can get this book. It's just $5 on ebook at GoSellYourSoul.com, and it's basically the greatest hits of everything I talk about in this show. Also, go check out my new graphic novel, Pixie Dust, at pixiedustcomic.com. It is live on Kickstarter now. You can get the first chapter free on the page. Thank you so much, wannabes and creators. I will see you next time.